We begin tonight here with the horrific murders of Hollywood actor and director Rob Reiner and his wife Michele, stabbed to death in their own home. Tonight, their son Nick Reiner is now under arrest in their murders. The chilling case unfolding over the last 24 hours, police say the bodies of Rob and Michele Reiner were found stabbed to death in their Los Angeles home.
December 14th, 2025, a Sunday afternoon in Brentwood, Los Angeles. Christmas decorations hung throughout a beautiful home on Chadbourn Avenue. Inside, a Hollywood legend and his wife of 36 years lay dead, their throats slit. The man arrested for their murder? Their own 32-year-old son. This is a story of Rob Reiner. And I need to warn you, what happened in that house will shake you to your core. But before we dive deep into this nightmare, if you're new to Mystoracrimes, do me a favor. Hit that like button, drop a comment below with your thoughts. Share this video because this story needs to be heard. Subscribe to the channel, and smash that bell icon so you never miss a case like this. Trust me, you'll want to stay updated on this one. Now, let me take you back to where this all began, because to understand what happened on that Sunday, we need to understand who Rob Reiner was. This wasn't just any Hollywood director. This was the man who gave us The Princess Bride, When Harry Met Sally, Stand By Me, A Few Good Men, movies that defined generations. Rob Reiner was 78 years old, the son of legendary comedian Carl Reiner, and he'd spent his entire life in the spotlight, first as meathead on All in the Family, then as one of Hollywood's most successful directors. His wife Michele was 68, a talented photographer and producer. They met in 1987 on the set of When Harry Met Sally, and by 1989, they were married. Everyone who knew them said they were inseparable. They had this beautiful life together. For children, a legacy most people could only dream of. Rob was worth millions, lived in one of the most exclusive neighborhoods in Los Angeles, and was still working, still creating, still fighting for causes he believed in. But here's the thing about perfect-looking families. Sometimes behind those closed doors, behind the Christmas decorations and the Hollywood smiles, there's a darkness growing. And in the Reiner family, that darkness had a name: Nick Reiner. Nick was Rob and Michele's 32-year-old son, and his life had been a battle from the time he was a teenager. We're talking about drug addiction that started when he was just 15 years old. Think about that for a second. 15. By the time Nick turned 22, he'd already been through 17 different rehab facilities. 17. Let that sink in. This wasn't a kid who went to rehab once and relapsed. This was a young man caught in a cycle so vicious, so destructive, that his parents spent years watching him spiral, catching him when he fell, only to watch him fall again. Nick himself talked about this in a 2018 podcast, and his words are haunting when you know what's coming. He admitted that he'd go to rehab, stay clean just long enough to convince his parents he was okay. Then the moment he got home, he'd use again. He said it himself. I just stayed sober long enough until I could go home, and then I just went home and did drugs. Can you imagine being Rob and Michele, hearing your son say that? Knowing that every time you thought you'd gotten through to him, it was just an act? But it gets darker. Nick didn't just cycle through rehab facilities. He was homeless, multiple times, in multiple states: Maine, New Jersey, Texas. This son of a millionaire Hollywood director was sleeping on the streets because, according to Nick, his parents gave him a choice: do it their way, go to the programs they suggested, or be homeless. And Nick chose the streets. He spent nights and weeks out there, and looking back on it later, he said, "When I was out there, I could have died." It's all luck. You roll the dice and you hope you make it. Now, here's where this gets really complicated. And I want you to think about this from Rob and Michele's perspective. What do you do when your child is an addict? When every expert tells you one thing, but your son is telling you something else? In 2015, Rob directed a film called Being Charlie. Nick co-wrote it. It was semi-autobiographical, based on Nick's own struggles with addiction. The plot was about a young man in and out of rehab with a successful father who has political ambitions. Sound familiar? Rob admitted making that film was torture.
It's not a secret, but my son, Nick, who was one of the writers of the screenplay, had his problems with substance abuse, and he went through a number of rehab programs.
He said, It was very, very hard going through it the first time, with these painful and difficult highs and lows. And then making the movie dredged it all up again. But here's what's really important. After that film, after reliving Nick's addiction through a movie, Rob and Michele admitted something that most parents would never say publicly. They admitted they made mistakes. They said, when Nick would tell us that it wasn't working for him, we wouldn't listen. We were desperate, and because the people had diplomas on their wall, we listened to them when we should have been listening to our son. That statement right there shows you the kind of parents Rob and Michele were. They weren't giving up. They were trying. They loved their son. But love isn't always enough, is it? Because despite that realization, despite trying different approaches, Nick's problems continued. And according to sources, in the months leading up to December 2025, Nick had moved back into his parents' home. Michele was reportedly anguished, telling friends, "We've tried everything." Those 3 words. We've tried everything. Can you hear the exhaustion in that? The desperation? The feeling of being completely out of options? Friends said Michele had been confiding in them for months about Nick. She and Rob were at their wits' end. They'd spent millions on treatment. They'd opened their home to him again and again. They'd been patient when patience seemed impossible. They'd shown grace when others would have walked away. But what do you do when your child, your adult child, won't or can't get better? When everything you try fails? When the programs don't work? When the love isn't enough? When the second chances turn into 20th chances? Now, let's talk about Saturday, December 13th, 2025, the night before the murders. Conan O'Brien was throwing a Christmas party. These Hollywood Christmas parties, they're formal affairs. We're talking suits, dresses, the whole 9 yards. Rob and Michele were invited. And here's the thing. They asked if they could bring Nick. They specifically said they want to keep an eye on him. They were worried about him. Think about what that means. They couldn't leave him alone. They couldn't trust him to be okay for one evening. So Conan said yes, bring him along. That's what friends do. They try to help. Nick showed up in a hoodie. Everyone else is in formal wear, and Nick walks in wearing a hoodie. Now, maybe that doesn't sound like a big deal to you, but it is. It shows a complete disregard for the situation, for his parents, for the hosts. It's a middle finger to everyone in that room. But it wasn't just the clothes. People at that party noticed something was off. Nick was exhibiting what witnesses called antisocial behavior. He was staring at people, just staring, making them uncomfortable. You know that feeling when someone's looking at you, but they're not really seeing you? When their eyes are on you, but their mind is somewhere dark. That's what people described. And then it happened. Rob and Nick got into an argument. And I'm not talking about a quiet disagreement. This was loud. Loud enough that multiple people at the party heard it. Loud enough that it caused a scene. Rob and Michele left the party. Can you imagine how embarrassed they must have been? How worried? How angry? They left their friend's Christmas party because their 32-year-old son couldn't hold it together for one night. But here's the question that should be running through your mind right now. What was that argument about? What did they say to each other? Because less than 24 hours later, both Rob and Michele would be dead. Sunday morning, December 14th. In the early morning hours, Nick checked into the Pierside Hotel in Santa Monica. Remember this detail because it's important. The hotel staff would later discover something absolutely chilling. The shower was full of blood. The bed sheets were covering the windows. There was blood on the bed. Nick Reiner had checked into that hotel covered in his parents' blood. But back at the Reiner home, their 28-year-old daughter Romy had no idea what had happened. It's Sunday afternoon now, around 3:30 p.m. She goes to her parents' house on Chadbourn Avenue. Maybe she's stopping by for a visit. Maybe they had plans. The house is covered in Christmas decorations, twinkling lights, wreaths, all the warmth and joy of the holiday season. Everything looks normal from the outside. The neighborhood is quiet, peaceful, one of the safest areas in Los Angeles. And then Romy walks inside and finds her parents dead. Both of them, throats slit. The Christmas decorations now a sick contrast to the horror inside. Can you even begin to imagine that moment? That's your mother and father, the people who raised you, who loved you, who were supposed to be there for years to come. And they're lying there in their own home, murdered. The home where you grew up, where you celebrated holidays, where you felt safe. And now it's a slaughterhouse. That image will never leave Romy's mind. Never. She'll carry that with her for the rest of her life. And her brother, her own brother, is the one who did this to them. To her. Romy calls 911. Can you imagine making that call? My parents are dead. Someone killed them. Emergency services arrived at 3:40 p.m. The police immediately seal off the house. This is now a crime scene. Investigators start working, and they're seeing something that tells them this wasn't a robbery gone wrong. Nothing was stolen. This wasn't some random act of violence. The way Rob and Michele were killed, the brutality of it, their throats cut, this was personal. This was rage. This was someone who wanted them to suffer. And when you see that level of violence against elderly victims in their own home, you know it's probably someone close to them.
Tonight, police say the person responsible for the brutal murders of Hollywood icon Rob Reiner and his wife Michele is their very own son.
They worked throughout the night on this case and were able to take into custody Nick Reiner, a suspect in this case.
By 9:15 p.m. that same evening, police arrest Nick Reiner. Think about the timeline here. His parents are discovered around 3:40 p.m. Within 6 hours, police have enough evidence to arrest their son. The investigation moved that fast because the evidence was that clear. Nick wasn't even at the house when Romy found the bodies. He was somewhere else, probably still at that hotel, trying to clean blood off himself that would never wash away. The family released a statement that night, and you can feel the pain in every word. It is with profound sorrow that we announce the tragic passing of Michele and Rob Reiner. We are heartbroken by the sudden loss, and we ask for privacy during this unbelievably difficult time. That statement doesn't mention Nick. It doesn't mention that their brother and son had just been arrested for murdering their parents. But Billy Crystal showed up at the house. Larry David showed up. These were Rob's closest friends, and they were there in the middle of this nightmare.
Looked like he was about to cry.
Trevor Tafahima laying a flower and candle at the gate. He worked security at the Reiner home. Tells me their son Nick lived on the property and was obviously troubled.
You could tell he had some problems with drug addiction. If Nick is the suspect, I would never have thought that he would have done this to his parents.
Monday morning, 5:04 a.m. Nick Reiner is officially booked on suspicion of murder. The Los Angeles Police Chief, Jim McDonnell, holds a press conference and announces that Nick Reiner is responsible for his parents' deaths. Initially, Nick's bail is set at $4 million. But then it gets changed. He's being held without bail. And here's why. Nick is now on suicide watch in administrative segregation at Twin Towers Correctional Facility in downtown Los Angeles. As of December 16th, just 2 days after murders, the case has been turned over to the Los Angeles County District Attorney's Office. Legal sources say Nick will likely be charged with double homicide. And under California law, if convicted, he's looking at life in prison without the possibility of parole. No death penalty in California anymore, but life without parole means he'll die in prison. The son of Rob Reiner, who grew up with every advantage, every opportunity, will spend the rest of his life behind bars for killing the two people who loved him most. The tributes have been pouring in. President Obama released a statement saying Rob gave us some of our most cherished stories on screen, but beneath all of that was a deep belief in the goodness of people. Governor Gavin Newsom called Rob a big-hearted genius. Kathy Bates, who starred in Rob's film Misery, said he changed the course of her life. Stephen King called him a wonderful friend and brilliant filmmaker. Eric Idle from Monty Python revealed he'd spoken to Rob just the night before, for over an hour, talking about his thoughts for the future. A future that would never come. So now we're left with the questions that haunt cases like this. The questions that don't have easy answers. At what point does a parent's love become enabling? Rob and Michele admitted they made mistakes, that they should have listened to Nick more. But they also set boundaries. They gave him ultimatums. They tried tough love. So what were they supposed to do differently? When do you stop helping? When do you walk away from your own child? And here's the harder question. Could this have been prevented? Was there a moment, a decision, a conversation where things had gone differently? Rob and Michele would still be alive? Or was Nick so far gone, so broken by addiction and mental illness, that this tragedy was inevitable? What drives a son to murder the parents who spent decades trying to save him? Was it the drugs? Was it mental illness? Was it rage built up over years of feeling controlled? Feeling like a disappointment? Or was it something that happened that night after the Christmas party? Something we'll never fully understand? If you've made it this far, I need you to do something for me. Hit that like button if this case affected you. Drop a comment below and tell me what you think. Do you think Nick Reiner is a victim of addiction, or is he simply a murderer? Share this video because people need to hear this story. Subscribe to Mystoracrimes because we're going to follow this case all the way through the trial. And click that bell icon so you're notified the moment we have updates. This story isn't over. The legal battle is just beginning, and I'll be here to bring you every single development. Until next time, stay safe out there.